Hi, welcome to Detours, Understanding Acquired Brain Injury, and this is Genes and Chromosomes, Unit 1, Chapter 2. So we're going to be discussing eventually the connection between genetics and neurology, neurogenetics. So what we do in this next unit, we want to go over some of the mechanisms inside the cell, some of the organelles, the structures. As I just said, they're called organelles, and you find them inside animals, plants, Monera, algae. You know, it's like some viruses even have an organelle or two. Organelles allow cells to perform their functions day to day, just like our organs do, hence the name organelle. They're mostly built of proteins. The cells we find in animals, plants, yes, including people, are eukaryotic. We mentioned that before, which means they have a membrane around their DNA. We'll talk about DNA specifically next time, but more specifically. But just know that DNA forms in the nucleus of the cell. Now, the membrane around the nucleus is called the nuclear membrane or nuclear envelope. The nuclear envelope has structures in it to help the DNA divide and to make its proteins. There's a structure inside the nuclear envelope called the nucleolus. The nucleolus is responsible for synthesizing ribosomal RNA. RNA is ribonucleic acid. It's a cousin of DNA. So it's important to know about the ribosomal RNA because we need that in order to make proteins. So the structures inside the nuclear envelope are needed to make proteins because, again, the main job of DNA for the cell's day-to-day job, the workaday job, is making proteins for things like membranes and nucleolus, and all the good stuff. So they're the kind of the workaday. So surrounding the cell on the outside is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is probably one of the most complex structures outside the nucleus. The cell membrane is bilipid, meaning it's two layers of fats, lipids, simple fats, that maintains a balance between the environment outside the cell and inside the cell. Really important to maintain that, whether it's a single-celled organism that's living in some pond or whether it's inside your body, because the chemistry is going to be very different outside versus inside that cell. The membrane of any cell, and when we talk about neurology, when we talk about microbiome, when we talk about how neurons work, maintaining that stability is literally a life or death kind of thing. Again, why is cell membrane so important? That cell membrane defines a cell, because otherwise you just have gunk floating around inside whatever the fluid is. So the membrane of any cell, it's got gates, it's got to let things in and out, it's got active pumps which are run electrochemically to move substances inside and out. Keep that in mind too for the future. It's got receptors which external chemicals will lock onto to open and close gates to run pumps. It's got channels which are capable of opening and closing to let substances in and out, ionically charged, things that have an electrochemical charge. Again, think neurons. So it's got the ability to passively move fluids in and out. So cell membrane, really, really important. It's kind of like your skin. Really, really, really important. Other organelles, though, do have membranes, such as the nuclear envelope, but mitochondria do. Lysosomes do. But the most complex of these structures is the cell membrane, just because it has to regulate so much. In different types of cells, such as immune cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, the cell membrane is really what makes the cell functional in the first place. I mean, your neurons can conduct electrochemical energy because the cell membrane works. And because of these specialized pumps and channels and things like that. And it is damage to these structures which often leads to certain neurological disorders and psychiatric diseases. So the study of this often is the study of cell membranes. All right, we all know this one. Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah, you've all seen the cheesy movies and film strips and other things like that. We all know that. But mitochondria are much, much more than that. They were, at some point, we think, independent organisms, maybe a billion some odd years ago. They still have their own separate set of chromosomes, their own DNA. Mitochondria do generate ATP for cell energy, no question about it. If it weren't for that, it's likely life would not have gotten beyond a single stage. And some astrobiologists have argued this is what makes life on Earth so unique, and maybe makes some of those questions out there, exobiology, it only ever happened once, technically twice, because chloroplasts are also another independent organism, but they emerge at the same time. So the question is, they're symbiotic, parasitical, kinda, but now mutualistic, so they live with us, and they are essential for our functioning. Don't know. But they enable us to be high energy. Our heart cells are packed with mitochondria. It's why your heart doesn't get tired beating continuously. Think of what would happen without mitochondria in your heart. It couldn't function. You'd build up lactic acid, which is toxic, and that's why you get stitched. That's why you get a stitch if you run too much or whatever else. But your heart doesn't, because it's loaded with mitochondria, so it produces energy continuously. So what else do mitochondria do? I just said it isn't just a powerhouse. The other thing it does is it breaks down waste. Very essential. And we find in acquired brain injury, failure of the mitochondria is often what leads to a type of poisoning, in effect, with free oxygen radicals. Mitochondria break down the free roaming oxygen. The free radicals are bound, and other metabolic waste that we have to get rid of necessary. So basically, they handle both waste disposal as well as energy production. It's kind of like the generator as well as the trash guy. So very essential. And again, they have their own separate ring chromosome. It's a ring-shaped chromosome, which produces a number of important proteins. And it also produces proteins necessary for breaking down of other metabolic waste you find in your liver. The cytochrome series of proteins, which help you break down things like alcohol and medications. Essential. So people who have defective mitochondria, which, by the way, you get your mitochondria from your mother because it remains in the egg. Nobody, male or female, you both, whether male or female, get your mitochondria from your mother because it comes from the egg. Mitochondrial Eve is the term, because you follow that mitochondria back, and it acts as a decent clock because we know about how often mutations happen, so we can trace backwards in time number of mutations and find out about where our last common ancestor is in time. But that's a whole other, we are not getting that deep unless we need to talk about changes like that. All right, so what else? We talked about the chloroplasts combining water, CO2 to make sugar, which is converted. Mitochondria are found in the brain, large numbers, because neurons do hard work. There's also another structure called the ribosome. Now, ribosomes are essential because they act like protein factories. They are found throughout the cell. They're found in a structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum, it's a series of folded layers of proteins which kind of shunt proteins made through the ribosomes to vacuoles and other storage places. Think of it like trucking or to railroad transport to warehouses. Think of the endoplasmic reticulum as railroad tracks to warehouses that store what you need. And the protein or the ribosomes are factories that make the proteins. They read RNA, which is, we'll get into that, how that works later. But endoplasmic reticulum, the ER is the railroad tracks, is the railroad to move the supplies to vacuoles, which are warehouses to store things, okay? The ribosome will latch on to a certain type of RNA, which we'll talk about, called messenger RNA, and it will decode it and it will connect other types of RNA and produce proteins, okay? There are two different types of endoplasmic reticulum. There is smooth endoplasmic reticulum and there's rough endoplasmic reticulum. Rough endoplasmic reticulum contains the ribosomes. And the rough is because under a microscope, a light microscope, if you're to look at it, looks like this. It looks rough because those ribosomes in there which produce the proteins. Smooth, and by the way, rough ER is found in certain cell types that produce long, complex proteins. Now, all cells have some of both, but a rough ER is found in the more neurons, muscle cells, heart cells, you know the song. Those kind of cells that need to be producing digestive cells, liver cells, those kind of cells. They're the ones where they need to be producing a lot of proteins for breakdown of complex proteins, etc. Smooth ER, on the other hand, contains enzymes which make the phospholipids, the fats for like cell layer, stuff like that. You find a smooth ER towards the cell membrane because the lipids, the hormones, the other things that you're making are going to be sent out of the cells through the channels and the other structures on the surface of the cell. And those are the ones that are sent through the gates and other things like that. There's more smooth ER, for example, in endocrine cells. I'm sure you can figure out why. Endocrine cells are the ductless glands, hint, hint. And for example, in the pancreas, there are a lot of smooth ER, sending out hormones. Or the digestive system further down, to help break down hepatocytes in the liver, in the kidneys. So, smooth ER. Now, it's secured to the cell by the cytoskeleton and microtubules, which we'll mention in a little bit, which make up part of the endoplasmic reticulum. Again, remember, the endoplasmic reticulum works like the railroad. It transports things, and you transport them to where you need them to go. Golgi apparatus. These structures package and ship. So they're responsible to pack stuff that's being shipped through the endoplasmic reticulum, like this, proteins from the endoplasmic reticulum for their appropriate destination. So if it's got to go a long distance through the bloodstream, it needs to be wrapped and packaged right? So shipping and packaging. Those organelles are kind of like FedEx or UPS in the cell. As with the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus has a structure called a cistern or cisterns, which are the channels through which the sorting and packaging happens. A lot of this is guided by the electrochemical charge. The proteins have a charge which will pull and push them, and so that helps move them along. Finally, we're going to talk about vesicles, and there are many different types, and these, like I said, are kind of like a warehouse for storing things for movement on or later use by the cell. There are vacuoles. Vacuole is a vesicle that contains primarily water. Then there are lysosomes. These structures, we talked about this before when it comes to brain injury. Lysosome is a vesicle which contains specific digestive enzymes which have been produced, through reading the genes to make this, to help break down waste or other things that have been already partially broken down by the mitochondria or by other active enzymes. And so also the lysosome serves as self-destruct mechanism in case the cell is injured or damaged. And this is part of secondary damage when we've talked about this with TBI. But in certain cells, like immune cells, phagocytes, things like that, which engulf infectious organisms, lysosomes help digest and break down. Things like secretory vesicles. These meant to secrete substances into the intercellular space or the vascular space. So again, think about for neurotransmitters. Secretory vesicles contain like dopamine or serotonin, norepinephrine, all the good stuff from, secretory vesicles hold these neurotransmitters, and when a signal is sent down the axon of the neuron, secretory vesicles will spit a squirt of this into the synaptic cleft between the presynaptic and postsynaptic gap, and will hit the receptors, which we talked about on the cell membrane of the next neuron down the line. So synaptic vesicles. There are many other types of secretory vesicles, for example, like endocrine and others, but they work the same way. There are names for extracellular vesicles which float around on their own out there, and they trigger and release things to neighboring cells. These are called ectosomes and microvesicles. Finally, the cytoskeleton. This is also a protein structure which you find, which gives the cell its shape and provides support. It also allows for organelles to have protection against impact, and if it's twisted, stretched. The cytoskeleton is made mainly of the microtubules and other anchoring structures. It works kind of like your skeleton does. And so, it's important to keep this one, in mind too, because this often gets damaged in traumatic brain injury. And that almost sums up everything except like the cytosol, or the fluid portion of the cell. It's mainly made of water, but it's like it contains salts, magnesium, potassium, and all the good stuff, and it serves kind of solution in which to dissolve various solutes. So I just wanted to touch on these major, so when we talk about that, like for the future, and when we bring these up, you know what they are. All right, so that's the end of Chapter 2 for Unit 1. And then finally, we will be going into the specifics, a little more about some of the basic structures of chromosomes before we get into how they function. So please like, share, don't forget that bell icon. And if you have any questions, please post them below. Have a good day. Bye.